want to get into some of that legality because our Chase team has reached Elizabeth Wydra in Washington. She's a U.S. Supreme Court litigator. And, great to have you on the program, Elizabeth. I want to ask you this question. Is it pitting states against the federal government if the U.S. Attorney General comes out and says, I'm very disappointed by the Supreme Court, federal agencies continue on doing what you're doing?
Well, what the Supreme Court has done today is said that the Constitution does not protect a right to abortion for women across the United States. And the way that American constitutional law works is that when a right is enshrined in the Constitution, then it doesn't matter in which state you live. We all enjoy that right equally. But by giving it back to the states, by saying the states get to determine a woman's equality and liberty, then it is essentially setting up this conflict between those who think that the Constitution provides this irreducible minimum of liberty, the decision that the Constitution protects the decision to make these fundamental life choices and fundamental choices about one's own body to the people who are affected by those decisions, to the people themselves, versus those who think that there isn't a constitutional interest in a woman deciding for herself whether or not to continue a pregnancy. The majority, as Justice Breyer said, apparently does not think there is constitutional significance to a woman being forced to endure forced pregnancy. That is extraordinary. And so I think that Merrick Garland's statement as the U.S. Attorney General is recognizing the fact that you have competing visions of liberty here. We have a 6-justice conservative majority that has said for the Supreme Court that there isn't a constitutional interest in a woman's free and equal citizenship that includes the right to make these fundamental decisions about one's own body, about one's own life course for herself, or a vision of liberty that says a state can decide for her whether or not she is forced to continue a pregnancy, even if in some cases her life could be ended because of it, even in cases of rape or incest, and even potentially criminalize her attempts to travel to other states to access that abortion care.
Elizabeth, what are you going to be watching for in terms of where this decision takes America? We could say this decision, which might have been unthinkable just a few years ago, has actually been decades in the making. And because of one president who put conservative Supreme Court justices there on the bench, your country has been turned on its head. Is that going to be a point of discussion as well, or are we just that's the way it is, live with it?
I definitely do not think it's going to be that's the way to live with it. As Justice Breyer noted in his dissent, what has changed in the decades since Roe versus Wade became settled law is the composition of the court. We have more justices put on the court by former President Trump, who were aggressively conservative in this area, as well as we saw there was a ruling yesterday on gun rights. There is an aggressively conservative 6-justice conservative majority that has gone out of its way to strike down Roe. And, American people support abortion being legal. They recognize that one cannot be a truly equal and free citizen if one cannot decide for oneself whether, when, and with whom to have a family. And the United States has grappled with this question before. When the 14th Amendment was drafted, that's the part of the Constitution that the Supreme Court should have been guided by today. And they said, look, we understand that the brutality of slavery denied to people the freedom to make those decisions about their bodies and about their families themselves. And we are going to protect equality and liberty in the Constitution. But the 6-justice conservative majority rejected that vision of the Constitution and instead have this vision of liberty that bears no relation to our amended Constitution and the ways in which generations of activists have rewritten it through the amendment process to make it more inclusive and more equal and more just.
We're looking for reaction from other world leaders, and I can tell you that Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Elizabeth, has just sent out this reaction. He called the Supreme Court ruling on abortion horrific, and says his heart goes out to women who lost their abortion rights. So we'll be looking for further reaction. But I also want to ask you about some of the ripple effect that could come out of this. Discussions right now on abortion and a woman's right to her reproductive decisions. What about discussions on same-sex marriage? What about discussions on other forms of or some forms of contraception? Where do you see this leading in many states in your country to other wider discussions of rights of people in the United States?
Abortion rights were the rights that fell today, but unquestionably, these other fundamental rights are also at stake with this court. Justice Thomas, in his concurring opinion to the majority, made clear that he thinks that the Supreme Court's precedents on contraception use, on marriage equality for LGBTQ individuals, that these types of decisions should also be reconsidered. And so the analysis that's been used by the majority, while they try to say, oh, this is only about abortion, it's unquestionably clear that the cramped and frankly outrageously wrong vision of liberty that the majority sees from the Constitution and applies today to strike down Roe could also strike down fundamental rights of marriage for LGBTQ individuals as well as interracial couples, the ability to make decisions about one's own body and family with respect to same-sex intimacy and contraception use, even between married couples. The fact that these rights are also now placed into grave uncertainty really does put us in a whole new world across this country.
You know, we'll be watching in Canada, and certainly, you know, those discussions have been had up here as well. You could call it one that no party really wants to touch at this point, but we'll be watching to see what happens in November. Now, the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, Elizabeth, she called a woman's right to choose to have reproductive freedom is on the ballot in November. That is the key ballot question. Do you see it that way? Because there could be an absolute shift if these ripple conversations that we're talking about, same-sex marriage, contraception, even between married couples, abortion, if all 435 seats on the House are up for grabs, if 36 seats in the Senate are up for grabs, and they are, do you think this will rally Americans who are in favor of reproductive rights, of contraception, of same-sex marriage, et cetera, to, vote with their feet and walk to the ballot box?
So I think there's both a short-term and a longer-term answer to that. I think in the short term, certainly a lot of people who, have been fearing that this would happen now actually got the gut punch of seeing it become a reality. But then also those who were kind of taking it for granted that a precedent that has been basically in place for their lifetimes, Roe versus Wade has been reaffirmed over and over for decades. Now they've seen that actually taken away. So I think a lot of people are going to be shaken into reality, and they will be looking to elect leaders who will protect abortion rights at the national level, also engage in other policies that could ensure that women and other people who become pregnant are protected. But I also think longer term, the question will be, who is placed on the court? And the fact is that when we elect people, particularly for the Senate and as well the president, they decide who is going to be nominated to the Supreme Court and these other federal courts. And as was noted by Justice Breyer in his dissent, what has changed since Roe has been reaffirmed over and over is the composition of the court. And so if you think that what the justices have been doing on this court is wrong, then you probably want to think about voting for people who will do something different, who will put people on the court who have a different vision of liberty and equality, the one that respects the Constitution's guarantees of equal citizenship and takes into account our arc of constitutional progress, and also engages in potentially other court reforms. So all of those things are going to be on voters' minds when they cast their ballots.
We'll certainly be watching for voter turnout as well. Elizabeth, great to have you on the program. You be well. I know you will have a very busy day ahead of you, but thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Elizabeth Wydra in Washington. She's a U.S. Supreme Court litigator.